Hey, I want to make this video here explaining some of the most common types of tech you see in Celeste. The term tech means technique, and pretty much just refers to some combination of Madeline's moveset that makes you move in a unique way. These techniques are used all throughout things like speedruns and custom maps, so if you're newer to the game or something, this might help with learning some common moves in this game. I'll arrange these in 4 main categories: Dash Tech, Dashless Tech, Holdable Tech, and Entity Tech. So starting with Dash Tech, you're probably familiar with one, wave dashing. That is, it's taught in Farewell. This technique involves you doing a down diagonal dash into the ground and following it with a jump. The result is a jump that has increased speed but doesn't go as high. Farewell also teaches you that wave dashing has more nuance than just that. If you start your dash too close to the ground, jumping will not refresh your dash, so you won't be able to follow it up with another one. You'll have to start from just the right height, such that there is a reasonable delay between the dash and the jump. This pretty much comes down to how the game actually refills your dash. If you make contact with the ground following a dash, Madeline's hair will be blue for half the duration of the dash, or for 5 frames out of the 10 in total. Of course, jumping before the game has enough time to refill your dash will naturally result in a wave dash that does not retain your ability to dash again. This process of delaying the time between the dash and the jump is called extending, and doing an extended hyperdash follows the same logic. A hyper, as I'll refer to it here, is nothing more than a wave dash performed while completely grounded. Instead of timing your input at a point where Madeline and the ground are within a certain spacing, you jump only in the second half of the dash, which ends up getting burnt into your muscle memory really well. Generally, as you improve at the game, doing an extended hyper starts feeling easier than doing a wave dash. The super dash is another common piece of tech you'll see. It's just like the hyper from before, but you perform it with a completely horizontal dash rather than with a down diagonal one. The resulting jump will have increased height but lower speed, so it's useful in different scenarios. Finally, the wall bounce is a tech initially introduced in the Chapter 7 B-side. This one is mechanically the same as the other 3, but applied in the context of wall jumping. If you dash up along the side of the wall, doing a jump out of this dash will result in a wall jump that inherits the momentum of the upwards dash, something you see a ton throughout the Seasides and Farewell. The game is also very generous with the leniency on these, seeing as there are 7 pixels of corner correction on upwards dashes like this, and 2 extra pixels of wall jump leniency. Speaking of leniency, the game has a ton of built-in leniency mechanics that make these tech feel much nicer to execute. If you input something like a jump a couple frames before you've actually hit the ground, the game will be nice and still give you the jump to make it feel like your inputs aren't being unfairly eaten. If you hear me talking about buffering, this is what I'm referring to. Another cool thing implemented into the game is that walking off a ledge like this will still give you 5 frames where you can jump despite being entirely off the ground. This is what's called a coyote jump. The next piece of tech I'll talk about is the hyper bunny hop, which is like a harder extension of the hyper from before. This tech involves doing a hyper but releasing the jump button earlier, resulting in a shorter jump, and then following it with another grounded jump. This second jump will preserve all speed given by the hyper, so you have the speed of the hyper and the height of Madeline's regular jump. This jump that preserves your speed is called a bunny hop, which is where the name hyper bunny hop comes from. By the way, if you want to practice any of the tech at any point, a great place to do it would be in the Strawberry Jam gyms. I'll link the download in the description. Next, the midair super, which is luckily a pretty basic tech to explain. It simply involves performing the horizontal dash of a super while not being previously grounded, like in this example. This is more lenient than it seems. Just like how dashing up against a wall gives you a margin of error to the left and right, dashing against a platform like this gives you some leniency if you're a bit too high or too low. Next, reverse tech is one of my favorite branches of tech in this game for a variety of reasons. The idea here is that you dash as if you were doing a wave dash or super like normal, but jump in the opposite way that you started. This actually gives 100% of the speed that a regular dash tech would give, so it looks cool as hell when performed. With that being said, it can also be tough to learn this at first, considering that inputting a dash in one direction but switching to the other direction before hitting the ground may feel unintuitive or awkward. The same logic with extending and all is applied here, by the way. Okay, so here's where I gotta spend some time going more in depth, because the Ultra is a tech that you really need to understand the fundamentals of to perform effectively. A problem you may encounter with the wave dash is that once you've done a single wave dash, you're not able to gain any more speed. You can increase its speed by wave dashing off a moving surface, but you'll still get a set speed every time without being able to increase it any further. The Ultra is kind of like wave dashing, but it does build up your speed. However, it's got its own set of jank and counterintuitiveness. The most common way you'll do an Ultra is by first doing an extended hyper and quickly following it up with a down diagonal dash. This dash will inherit the speed of the hyper. If you hit the ground after your dash ends, so after 10 frames, Madeline will receive a 1.2 times speed multiplier. This is what is called the Ultra Boost, or just the Ultra. Following this, you can jump and perform another down diagonal dash, and granted that it hits the ground after it has fully ended, you'll receive another 1.2 times multiplier, and from there you can chain these indefinitely. Now, even this is not entirely true. You will receive this 1.2 times multiplier regardless of whether you've hit the ground after your dash ends or not. The important thing to realize is your speed will get reset to 0 if the dash has ended while you are touching a surface. This is why ultras have an abnormal amount of spacing between them. It's the only way to ensure that the 1.2 times speed multiplier isn't killed. Another important thing to note is that buffering jumps is usually a no-go while doing ultras. Where buffering jumps is so useful in other types of tech, buffering the jumps and ultras will fail to give the 1.2 times speed boost around 5/8 of the time. I won't get into why this happens here because it might take a bit too long to explain. Just know to slide along the ground for a short amount of time before you hit jump. So with ultras out the way, the final tech in this category is the corner boost. Like pretty much every other tech here, this one uses the property of Madeline's dashes conserving speed. In a corner boost, you typically dash into the top corner of a block like this and buffer a climb jump. Climb jumps have this interesting property of keeping all of Madeline's speed, which is different to regular wall jumps which kill all speed she had previously. This is what allows the corner boost to work. It simply retains the speed of the dash and gives you an extra speedy jump. Now of course, if you jump while you are too low on the block you won't get any speed, so the timings can be pretty tight in some cases. Also, in a similar way to ultras, corner boosts can sometimes give less speed than usual, but it's nothing to do with buffering jumps, they can just fail at random if you're not aligned correctly. A corner boost gives you the most speed if it's performed within the 2 pixels of collision leniency that the game gives you for wall jumping. However, if you're familiar with how speed clipping works, you'll know that it's possible to just barely skip the frame where you're within this window if your positioning from before was unlucky. This property really sucks, and many custom maps will use blocks that prevent this from happening, which in my opinion is great because all it does is make the game play better. That's all for the more basic surface level dash tech, and next is the Dashless Tech. Interestingly, you won't just need Dashless Tech for high level custom maps, some of this tech is required to get the Dashless Berry in chapter 1 of the game. A common trend in Dashless Tech is that they love to abuse the goofy hitboxes in this game, and so the first thing I'll need to outline is that Madeline's collision box and damage box are separate. The part of Madeline that registers collision and blocks is this part in red, while the part that registers death and hazards is in green, 2 pixels shorter than the collision box. When you climb up a wall like this that has spikes at its peak, the game will only let you climb as high as the hurtbox is aligned with the spikes. But if you jump off and buffer another climb jump, you'll be able to jump from 2 pixels higher up than you would have been previously, allowing you to clear a gap of 5 tiles. This is called a 5 jump, and is used extensively throughout the Dashless Berry of chapter 1. The more general term for this is called a corner jump. Do not try to abbreviate this by the way. You can actually do some really funny stuff like this. Seeing as your hurtbox technically doesn't touch a surface when you do a corner jump, you're able to jump off a corner with spikes on all sides, you just gotta be good at precision. Another very cool property of spikes is that you won't get hurt if you're moving in the same way that they're facing. This is established pretty early in the game with parts like this, but it can be abused in so many more ways. For example, a block moving upwards with spikes can be jumped off like it's nothing with correct positioning, and same goes for wall jumps. Or like in this part of chapter 1, where you have to jump off this spiked surface by first jumping away from the wall and kicking off this corner as you brush past it, which is called a corner kick by the way. Now this is good, but if you actually want to reach this point without dashing, you'll need to get past this room, which has a gap of 6 tiles, something that a regular corner jump won't clear so easily. If you want to do this, knowing how to do neutral wall jumps will come in handy, so let me talk about those first. The neutral wall jump is done by jumping off a wall without any directional inputs held. It results in a noticeably different trajectory to a regular wall jump. This altered trajectory allows you to steer back towards the wall, gaining a bit of height in the process. If you learn the rhythm for doing neutral wall jumps, you can scale walls infinitely without losing stamina. Obviously, this has a huge amount of applications everywhere, but it's also one of the most common ways that you'll do 6 tile wide corner jumps. So going back to the chapter 1 example, to clear this gap of 6 tiles, you'll need to do a neutral wall jump away from the wall so that you're able to steer towards the corner with some speed. As we saw from the corner boost earlier, doing a climb jump will preserve Madeline's speed, so that extra little boost from the neutral will allow you to go far enough to clear the gap. This isn't the only way to do it. There's also this setup here, which I personally don't use that much, but still. Really, if you have any amount of speed going into a corner, you can perform a 6 jump. You can also do 7 and hell even 8 jumps, but these are not simple tech by any means. Now we move on to holdable tech. The term holdable refers to anything Madeline can hold, like a theocrystal or jelly. Farewell teaches some basic mechanics like gliding with the jelly, but also requires you to use mid-air regrabs. These work by first throwing the jelly and dashing back into it with an up diagonal dash. Dashing into a jelly actually preserves all speed you had from before, which is what lets this tech work. While jelly regrabs are pretty straightforward to perform because they're quite floaty in the air, doing theo regrabs like this is a lot harder. The major difference between a jelly and a theocrystal is that theo falls at a much faster rate, which puts it into the category of heavy holdables. You only have a couple frames to dash after you've thrown Theo, and only a couple frames to hold the grab button again. This might make Theo regrabs feel awkward to learn, but like a lot of Celeste tech, it gets ingrained into your muscle memory with enough practice. In lower level Celeste maps, you typically see Theo regrabs done with 2 dashes, which give you much more room for failure. As opposed to just merely throwing and regrabbing, you can use a solid wall to your advantage when doing regrabs. This is used quite a lot with the jellies in Farewell, where you throw a jelly against a wall and dash directly up into it, giving a straight upwards boost, but this applies the same for Theo as well. This is usually referred to as a holdable lift, but having a wall next to you isn't strictly necessary. Throwing a holdable by simply releasing the grab button causes Madeline to throw it pretty suddenly and with a slight diagonal arc, but if the grab button is released in combination with the down button being pressed, Madeline will drop it in place like this. This is called a neutral drop, and on its own it has some pretty neat uses. But if you neutral drop a jelly or Theo in midair, you can dash back up into it to get an upwards boost without any wall required. These are called Theo Vaders and Jelly Vaders, and they can get goddamn hard. You need a ton of control over which buttons must be held and released and in which order. It can get frustrating failing these over and over. Not to mention that the amount of height you get from these varies based on when you grab the holdable. Grabbing the object at a higher point gives a higher upwards boost as opposed to say grabbing it at the bottom, so in some cases you'll have to optimize for height by holding grab again at the last moment. Another nice use of neutral drops is if you want to scale a wall while holding an object. Of course, holding something in your hand prevents you from climbing up walls directly, but there is an effective yet kinda awkward work around this. You'll want to first neutral drop the object you're holding up against a wall like this. Very quickly after you've dropped your thing, do a climb jump up the wall right into it, picking it up once more. If you spend too much time after you've released your object, it'll simply fall past you, so your timings with these need to be quick. This is called a holdable climb. It's really finicky to learn at first, but it does feel natural with enough practice, I swear. Also, you're not able to do neutral jumps while holding a jelly, so if you want to climb up a wall with a jelly, you can do the same technique as before, but neutral jump instead of climb jump. The last holdable tech I'll talk about is my favorite, because of how ridiculous it is. Say you have a holdable object next to a dream block like this. If you dash close enough to the block, you can grab the object and smuggle it right through the dream block, accurately titled dream smuggling. If you were to turn around in the dream block and grab, the game gets really confused, and you can climb up and down walls as if you didn't have a thing in your hand. Furthermore, you can even dash while holding an object. You can do wave dashes, hypers, whatever the hell you want. Now the effects do wear off after you dash once, but it's still really funny seeing Madeline do this. Is this stretching the line between what's considered tech and what's considered a glitch? In my eyes, there was no line to begin with. The amount of stuff you can actually do with dream smuggles is seemingly never ending, so I of course won't cover them all here to keep things simple and brief. So here's the final group of tech, entity tech. This one simply refers to tech that can be done from the various entities you encounter in the game, such as zippers, Kevins, and the aforementioned dream blocks. Chapter 6 of the game introduces you to these things called bumpers, and they kinda suck, not gonna lie. I really don't like this thing. At least its Farewell Fish variant is better. If you hit them from the side, they launch you in whatever direction they were facing, but if you were holding a directional key away from the bumper/fish, so in the way you were being launched, you'll get a larger launch than before. This is simply called a launch boost, and the vanilla game doesn't ever make use of them, but they're a nice way to get extra speed and distance. Dream tech just refers to funny stuff you can do out of dream blocks, and there's quite a lot of it. The vanilla game utilizes 2 of these, the dream jump and the dream grab, taught in chapter 2 B and C sides respectively. The dream jump is performed by jumping as you leave a dream block, and as you probably could have expected, you get a nice big jump from the block. The game is very nice when it comes to leniency on these. You're able to press the jump button before, as, and after you've exited the block and still get a dream jump. There is also the dream grab, which I touched on a little earlier. Nothing too special here, turning around and grabbing as you leave a dream block lets you hold onto the side of it, which can save you from being thrown into spikes or something. While these are both pretty basic tech taught in the vanilla game, there's another secret thing you can do from them. Hypers and supers. Yeah, so dream blocks giving you a couple leniency frames after leaving them to do dream jumps also allows tech like hypers to be done. These can be executed by inputting a hyper or super like normal after you've left a dream block. Well, when I say normal, you want to minimize the time between the dash and the jump, ideally jumping on the frame that you press dash. This is easier than it seems. The game freezes up for 4 frames after each dash, so if you press dash and jump within 4 frames of each other, you'll be able to pull off an instant dream hyper or super. The benefit of these come from that dream hypers give less height than regular dream jumps, so custom maps will usually enforce dream hypers in this way. The arc of dream supers is similar to that of a dream jump, so you don't see them used as often. Just a short tip for doing dream hypers here, you actually get a larger window to perform them if you hyper with the crouch dash button. I didn't directly mention this, but a crouch dash kinda just functions the same as a downwards diagonal dash while it's on the ground. In fact, the game converts a down diagonal dash into a crouched horizontal dash if it detects that you're dashing on the ground. So a grounded down diagonal dash and a crouch dash can be used to do hypers in the exact same way. The crouch dash hyper just happens to make doing dream hypers easier. Also, the more common term for a crouch dash is a demo dash, named after the person who first found them. I think that's important to mention. Final one to talk about is the multi-boost. From my experience, multi-boost is more of a complementary tech used alongside other types of tech. If you have a moving block, say a zip mover, doing some move like a jump or a hyper will have extra momentum added, allowing you to go super speedy. The technical term for this is lift boost, and touching a moving block like this gives you 10 frames of it. Lift boost by itself is not a complicated concept. If you know how the zippers from chapter 1 work, you probably have a good understanding of how lift boost works. The important property you might not know about though, is that the 10 frames of lift boost you do get do not go away after you've left the block. So if you do a move like a jump and then quickly do something else, say a dash, the boost will get applied a second time. In this case, you will have done what's called a double block boost. A pretty good way to get a huge amount of speed in one go is by doing a hyper B hop off a dash swap block and then following it up with another dash. The first block boost is applied from the hyper, the second boost is applied from the bunny hop, and the third is applied once you do the dash. Oh man. That's about all I wanted to cover here. I pretty much only scratched the surface when it comes to Celeste Tech. This game has tons and tons of obscure moves that you almost never see used, but hopefully it served as a good introduction to the types of tech in this game.